And thanks to error log, so what the error log is so beautifully designed. For each and every step, there's a column in the error log, right? So when I analyzed all of my CR mistakes, I got to know that the only step where I'm making a mistake is a prefetching, and the second step is the POE, right?
Answer choice analysis.
So whenever I was doing cementing, what I realized that it is, and whenever I used to fill the error log, what I realized that what it is doing is it is reiterating that process which I learned under the concept file or the content part, right? Because the error log is designed in a similar manner along with the process, right? So that the cementing process helped me to understand where I'm making the mistakes. I would say last mile program is more than 50% of the preparation that for the eGMAT course, I would say. Why? Because it is the last stage where, because those 600 650 score is something you can reach by going through the course content and cementing, right? The additional 40 to 60 point improvements will come from your identification of weak areas and working on those. So the weak area was non-math related questions, and at the same time there was another weak area for me in DI was MSR. So those two areas, when I correlated those sections back to verbal, I realized that the CR and RC skills are gonna help me in the DI part as well.
Before we get into your GMAT prep, Rajesh, why don't you give us a little bit introduction about yourself and how you started this journey in the first place?
Okay, sure. So for the viewers, right? My name is Rajesh, and I'm an engineering graduate. I did my engineering back in 2014, and then since then I'm working with a software company. Multiple roles. One, I started as a developer, and then currently I'm working into pre-sales and sales related activities. How I started with GMAT. So after, currently I have around 8 years of work ex, and then I thought maybe the next big step probably will be a master's. And I started GMAT last year. So I got to know from one of my friends about this local institution. I started my journey there, but then I slowly understood that maybe I am already I'm already aware about the basics. The one thing which is missing is if I need to reach to a particular score, right? So then I got to know about eGMAT, and after my first attempt, I guess I gave my first attempt basis the preparation that I did with my local institution, right? And then I realized it's not easy, and if I want to reach to that particular milestone, I need a structured approach, and that's where I got to know. One of my friends suggested that why don't you go ahead with eGMAT, right? And that's where I started with the eGMAT journey.
Yeah. So Rajesh, taking a step back, right? Once you got onto the platform, you had initially taken a diagnostic mock. So when I looked into your diagnostic mock, you were around a 600 score back then in the GMAT Classic version, right? With a Q47 that stands around 61 percentile, and in verbal also it was slightly lower, a V28 kind of a score, which would be around 51 percentile, right? But at this point, when we are looking at a scores, right, we're talking about a Q86, which is a 91 percentile, and verbal also it's 84 percentile. It's a huge jump, right? So let's try to bifurcate your entire journey into the section-wise improvement, and how did you go about doing it? Okay. Starting from verbal, because I know this has seen the maximum improvement at this point, and being your mentor, I know it wasn't easy. There were hurdles here and there, and we had to cross one milestone at a time, right? So why don't you walk us through your verbal journey?
Okay, so verbal, to be very honest, it was one of my weak areas, and I knew that when I started, and that's where I thought initially before I started with eGMAT, right? I thought probably I will not focus much on verbal and I can get a good score, but that's a myth. When I joined eGMAT, right, I got to know that there are certain things, right? For example, when I started with Master Comprehension, I realized that even if I am not a native speaker, and I mean that the test is set up something like, and it does have an age for native speakers, but there's a process which we need to follow for each and every, whether it is RC, whether it is CR, right? So when I went through the Master Comprehension course, I realized that it's probably verbal is one of the areas where I can score good, get that improvement, right? Because Quant and DI was at par, and there's a limit, right, which area you can improve by how many points, right? So when I started with Master Comprehension, I realized that maybe with the process, right, whatever eGMAT has for RC and CR, I can get to that milestone. Obviously, that I when I started with CR, my CR was on a higher side, right? I used to get a I mean, I already had a process, but there was a fine tuning which was needed for CR. But however, RC was a big obstacle for me. So I guess that's where the eGMAT filled in those gaps, right? Whether it's Master Comprehension or the process that is required for CR and RC. So that, I mean, obviously the pre-thinking process for CR, right, and then the Master Comprehension can help for the RC parts, and not only RC, but it can help with the MSR questions, right, as well. So that's where rather than starting with Quant and DA, I started focusing on the weak areas in the verbal, and I guess that's where the confidence came in.
Yeah. Right. And when you're talking about, because this is a very massive improvement, right? So what were the key skills that you developed along the way that actually made this difference possible? How would you normally solve a question? And how did that approach change now for CR and RC?
Okay, so I'll talk about CR first. See, for CR, obviously the Master Comprehension is as a part of basics for both the section CR and RC. But when I started with CR, I was doing well with medium and easy difficulty level questions. The major obstacles in CR is the step of pre-thinking, right? So I used to read through the argument. I used to get that how there's a correlation or the reasoning which is critical to CR, in my opinion. So how the premises and the the conclusion is linked, right? Where I used to skip the pre-thinking step and that's where some of the CR mistakes were happening for me. So thanks to error logs, what the error log is so beautifully designed. For each and every step, there's a column in the error log, right? So when I analyzed all of my CR mistakes, I got to know that the only step where I'm making a mistake is a pre-thinking, and the second step is the POE, right?
Answer choice analysis.
Understand, answer choice analysis is the second stage where I was faltering. So when I analyze my entire error log, so I got to know that these are the only stages where I'm faltering. And that's where I focused, and I started focusing on these two steps only while solving my next question, right? So that's how these are the two things. The error logs, along with the pre-thinking, right, help me to get to the CR milestone. Talking about the RC, right? So the RC, when the critical thing for RC is to understand. Unless and until you understand the RC, you can't go ahead with the questions, right? Obviously, there are 6-7 steps that Master Comprehension has, right? And what I have analyzed basis my RC attempts, right? So whenever, again, if I analyze my error log, I got to know that there are two things that I was doing wrong. One thing is not reading the entire passage and understanding the entire passage thoroughly. Why? Because even if you skip one sentence, I used to there was this question which it's the first question will be most probably, I've seen the questions, right? Even if you miss a couple of sentences, the question will most likely to be on that particular area. So what I thought is, what I changed is basically, unless and until I have a good understanding of RC with all of these processes, right? I will not start with the questions, right? That's one thing that I changed. The second thing that I changed is whenever I'm reading a passage, I used to think that there will be a question of, obviously most of the RCs will have a question, what is the main point of the RC, right? So whenever I'm reading through the RC, I used to think that while reading only, I'll tackle that question, right? So which will help me to save a couple of minutes for that question. At the same time, it will enhance my understanding of that particular RC. So while reading, make sure that we should make sure that each and every para connections at the same time, what is the main point of the RC, right? That will help to expedite the timings, at the same time to tackle that main point question.
Yes, right. And like you said, once you were able to get a grasp on verbal, the next section that we attacked or moved to was quants. The benefit that you had in quants was that you were already starting with slightly good score when compared to your verbal, right? So conceptually, you had a sound knowledge, and then you had to work on the process, right? But at this point, when we're talking about a quant score, we are talking about a Q86, okay? We are talking about a 91 percentile, right? So what changes did you make in your quants, or what were the gaps that you could identify?
Okay, so quant, as you said, right? I would not say I was great, but I started at a good level, right? Good milestone level. But the only, for GMAT, what I realized is, irrespective of the section, which section you're targeting, understanding of the information, whether it is Quant, whether it is DI, whether it is RC, CR, whatever section it is, you need to read thoroughly, unless and until you understand the question, whether it is, again, whichever subsection section you are targeting. So when I realized, or probably when I analyzed all of my Quant mistakes, there are two things which came up. One thing is, either I'm missing out what is being asked in the question. For example, if the question is asking about time taken from A to point B, whereas I'm marking an answer for the time taking for traveling from point A to C, right? So it's a simple mistake. So the first thing is, I should read question carefully. That's one. The second thing is, whenever I'm doing a calculations, I used to miss out on, I used to do some silly mistakes. So again, as I started solving questions, I, rather than paying attention to other stages of this solving the questions, I particularly focused on, I used to pause right after reading a Quant question as well, similar to pre-thinking, right? So what is being asked? What are the constraints? Okay, and then I used to dig down for the calculations. So if I do that, I'm not missing on the constraints. I'm not missing on. I'm very careful about what is being asked in the question. And the third stage, which I took time, is having spending some good amount of time with calculations and not missing out any, probably not doing any silly mistake there, right?
Yeah.
So that's where all of those, from Q80, 82 to Q90, to get that Q90 milestone, probably these were the three gaps that I had.
Yeah.
And I guess that's how I worked on my gaps for Quant.
Yes. Now, just sharing my screen here, Rajesh, I was looking into, your cementing quizzes, right? And we can gradually see the level of improvement where, on medium, you started at 80%, and by the time you were closing at 100%. And not just in one section, it's a trend that it's consecutively seen across the board. So how important do you think, that you need to time yourself in these quizzes?
Okay. So again, that was the hurdle I was facing, right? So in the Quant, probably there will be 2 or 3 questions where you will stuck, probably you might get a concept what the question is asking, and probably you might get that answer as well. But I'm very sure there are a couple of questions which will throw you away, and that's how the test is designed, right? So what I did is, obviously, again, those 2 questions will probably are there at a particular stage, just to get away with that moment of your exam, right?
Yeah.
So what I used to what I did is, basis whatever you shared, right, for the timings constraints and all.
Yeah, cementing
Whenever I'm
quizzes. Yeah.
correct, whenever I'm overshooting a time for Quant more than 3.5 minutes, I used to mark that for a review and go ahead. I used to skip that questions. But while marking, what I used to do is, there are 5 options, right? So I used to, and I'm very sure for easy, we can probably eliminate 2 or 3 choices, because those are either out of constraints or etc. But I used to mark whatever best option I can, and I used to move to the next question. And that's what happened in the actual GMAT as well. I remember there was a question 9 where I was faltering. I did that wrong, but nevertheless I skipped that questions. That kept me going, and probably the last questions, right?
Yeah.
So the couple of questions I got wrong, but nevertheless, if I I could have stayed there, probably skipping that worked well for me.
Yeah.
Otherwise it would have been and Quant being my first section, it could have been, that could have thrown away my entire test.
Yeah.
So I guess skipping the question is very, very critical for Quant. And that's what helped me as well.
Yeah, I think, since you did a lot of questions, like we can literally see that you've gone and, used a good about 80% of the questions, 90% of the questions in verbal, Quant, DI respectively, right? I think that focus practice that you did in cementing quizzes, to a certain extent, really made a very strong mind game for you, right? It helped you understand that, usually what would be your good timing to attempt a question. Because I remember that by the time we were done with cementing, and when we moved to the Quant sections, it was not very hard for you to transition between that. Do you agree there?
Yeah. So I was thinking that that's where the beauty of the entire course, right? So when I started with, and that's where I was thinking that for the quant, right? The course, if I talk about the course content, whether it is verbal, whether it is quant, whether it is DI, the course content itself is designed in such a manner that more or less, people are bound to make mistakes on particular areas, right? So the course content itself is designed. For example, if I in the CR, right, as I talked on the pre-thinking part, right?
Yeah.
So there are many of the mistakes will happen if we do not do that pre-thinking, or even if we pause for a minute and then understand what argument is asking for, right? So the entire course, whether it's called quant, DI, and verbal content, is designed along the lines where people are bound to make mistakes. That's why. The second part, which I liked about cementing, I mean, the eGMAT is the cementing part, right? When I went through the course content, and when I started with the cementing part, right? All of these questions, right? It's not like that for particular area. The questions are designed for various areas and various. For example, there are certain concepts in inferences as well, right? Inference questions as well under the part of CR. So the questions are so so I mean they're covering entire I would say landscape, right? Whether CR, whether RC, and that is true for quant and DI as well. So whenever I was doing cementing, what I realized that it is, and whenever I used to feel the error log, what I realized that what it is doing is it is reiterating that process which I learned under the concept file or the content part, right? Because the error log is designed in a similar manner along with the process, right? So that the cementing process helped me to understand where I'm making the mistakes, and what rather than modifying the process for solving the questions, what I realized is the process remains same, but there are some mistakes that I'm doing for a particular stage which I need to be very careful about. And that's where the cementing helped me to understand what are the areas, what is that stage of the process I'm making mistakes. As I said, for CR it was a pre-thinking. For quant, there are 7 different processes, right? So understanding, right? Process skills are there. So out of those 7, I used to folder in 2 and 3 when I talked about constraints, when I talked about the simplification, right? Understanding the questions, right? So I identified which part of that process I'm making mistake in, which cementing quizzes helped me in. And that's where I used to work. It's difficult to fill those gaps unless and until you do practice, right? And that's where whatever you mentioned, right? I almost consume 70 rather than 70. I would say 90 to 95% of my questions, right? So do not just solve the one mistake. Obviously, I did is and solving questions again and again. So what I want people to do is, whenever you are attempting a cementing quiz, pause and analyze then and there which part of the process that you are making mistake. And then only go to the next questions, or probably the next test, whatever you are attempting. That will help you to utilize those questions in a good manner. At the same time, you will not overrun, you will not go out of questions, which happened for some of my areas. So that's the mistake that I did.
Yes. And I think that's a learning, because the resources are supposed to be used as judiciously as possible, so that you can make the most productive use of them. Right? And moving on to the third section, Rajesh, because you are coming from a GMAT classic background, a student which had only quant and verbal, which were the finals course, and now you have a completely new section which is a DI. Right? So what were the initial challenges you faced in DI, and how did you go about overcoming them?
Okay. So when I talk about DI, more or less, I would not say it is similar, but when I attempted classic GMAT, there was this section IR, right, which is more or less similar to the DI, right? And I did score well in that, for the GMAT classic as well. I remember 85 percentile or something. But nevertheless, as I said, right, for content DI, there are some mistakes that even if you are good at it, there are some mistakes that will eventually you will do, right? For example, in DI, the major obstacles for me was the non-math related questions, right? Again, the process remains same, similar to what CR and RC teaches us, but sorry, I was getting a call, but that's fine. So the process remains same, but so the weak area was non-math related questions, and at the same time there was another weak area for me in DI was MSR. So those two areas, when I correlated those sections back to verbal, I realized that the CR and RC skills gonna help me in the DI part as well. So and that's where I started thinking that before even if the section is different, probably I should leverage same learning from verbal for these non-maths related questions. That's point number one. The second part, I used to if I talk about the deep the other sections, right? DS data sufficiency was good for me. TPA and and the other sections, right, for DI.
Yeah, GITA, yes.
Yes, the graphs and tables along with TPA, right? So
Yes.
so what I used to do wrong there is, again, not reading the questions carefully, which is similar to Quant, right? Because the graphs, let's say there's a sequence which which questions ask. For example, in graphs questions, there is a statement which needs to be thoroughly read, and then only you can go ahead and mark those values, right?
Yeah.
So I was doing mistakes in not reading a question carefully. So that's where I these were the two obstacles that I had. And what I did is I brought learnings from Quant and Verbal for the DI section. So that's how I overcome the obstacle for DI.
Yeah, and I think a common problem that students face in DI, and I do remember this very specifically that you also had this, like completing the sectional test, right? And it was a struggle, right? So how did you overcome that?
For sectional test, I mean, so again, if I analyze, and now that I have good data points, because for each and every sectional test, I went back and saw that I analyzed what went wrong, right?
Yeah.
And that's where these pointers came in. If I talk about verbal sectional test, right? So I whenever I used to start the test, I used to feel that I need to complete the test, right? So irrespective of the questions, etc., then I realized that because of the time pressure, I'm doing various mistakes at the initial of a stage. I mean, probably first few questions, first 5 questions or so.
Yeah.
So that's mainly because of the time pressure, right? Because I'm worrying too much about completing a test under the verbal section.
Yeah.
But what I changed for verbal is, rather than completing the test, I started focusing on the accuracy. For example, if I get a CR question at the start, or whatever, right, CR or C. So I used to focus on a particular question rather than completing a test, and I stopped looking at the watch, and I just started noting how many number of questions that I'm completing within a given time frame.
Yeah.
And that's where I realized that. And let's say if I'm completing 18 to 20 questions out of those 23, that is, and as long as I'm working on accuracy, right, focusing on accuracy, I got to know that you'll score good, right, as long as you have a good accuracy and you are completing 20 odd questions, right?
Yeah.
What I did is, slowly I started increasing that count. Instead of 18, can I attempt 21 questions, right? So that's how sectional test, that's what it changed for verbal sections. For content DI, it was simple because again, these metrics, right? The major important learning for content DI sectional test is not reading a question not reading a question thoroughly, right? I'm missing out on the ask, what question is asking about. I'm missing out on the constraints. So these two things, right, help me to get that score in content DI.
Yeah. Right. And moving to the mocks, because we understand that as a final step, every student takes a couple of mocks, so that just to see how close they are to their target score, right? What if they're able to replicate their verbal quant DI scores or not. And you also took a couple of mocks, right? So what were the strategies that you were consistently applying on the mocks that you could actually successfully replicate on the test as well?
So the pointers where I was struggling for attempting a mock is basically what sequence I should attempt the test, right? That was a first pointer. But nevertheless, that more or less what remains. I mean, as long as you are able to get good score in each and every sectional test, probably you'll do good on the mocks, right? But which section to start and when to take break, those were the two things that I struggled with. But in my opinion, what we did is I attempted one mock after once I'm done with the DI part, right? And then I attempted another mock after the quant part, right? Once I finished with the quant preparation. So whenever I attempted those initial 2 mocks, I focused that at least I will do good for those sections. Right? For example, if I'm attempting a mock after quant preparation, I focus that at least in quant I'll get good score, right? And similar for DI as well. So once I have 2 sections, I got to know that quant and DI, irrespective of whether I'm attempting at the first, let's say quant, I'm going for the first, quant being my first section in the mock, or whether it is DI, irrespective of irrespective of the sequence that I got to know that quant and DI I'm doing fairly well.
Yeah.
Now the major struggle was, where should I put my verbal section, right? Shall I place at the start? Shall I place it in between, or shall I place at the end, right?
Yeah.
Because I was I wanted to go away with verbal at the start itself, because what I used to think that if I'm attempting verbal at the end, probably I will lose focus, etc., and I'll lose and I'll lose the momentum as well, right?
Yeah.
But it was a vice versa, to be very honest, because when I started with Quant, I used to do good, and Quant and DI more or less correlate, and those two sections are in a similar, or I would say correlated. That helped me, keep that confidence, I would say, that I can do better, right? And once I'm done with Quant and DI, again, whatever, I guess I used to attempt Quant, verbal, and DI initially, and then you suggested to go for Quant, DI, and verbal sequence, right? So once I attempted Quant and DI, I got to know that more or less, if I'm doing good in sectional test for verbal, probably I just need to focus on each and every questions for verbal, even if this is a last section, and that's what helped me for verbal as well, right? And coming up with the strategy for oral mock, right? So, but my key obstacles were the sequencing of the sections, right? Sections was a major issue, and as long as you are doing good for each and every sectional test, I don't think the mock will be a challenge, as long as you have a habit of setting and setting for 2.5 hours or 3 hours, whatever it is.
Yes. And how many mocks did you take, Rajesh? Because I know this is a very common question that people have in their minds, that how many mocks is good enough, right? So why don't you tell us, how many mocks did you take?
In my opinion, when I started, I thought that I'll go, I'll attempt as many mocks as I can, right? Probably 20 was the number that I had in my mind before starting the GMAT, because I did prepare for CAT, and then that's for CAT it is all about practice, in my opinion. But GMAT is different, right? Attempting number of mocks, if let's say if I'm attempting 20 mocks, will not help for GMAT. In my opinion, even if you have good 3 to 4 mocks, will definitely help. And the critical part is, you should know when to appear for a mock, right? Solving mock each and every day will not help. As that's where I was saying that, right? The first mock I took after Quant. So the second I took after my DI preparation, and the third, and then there were 3-4 mocks that I took after the entire curriculum, right? So total 6 mocks. Again, why? Because I did not focus on the weak areas and rectifying those, right? I did mistakes, attempting a couple of mocks back to back. Correct. So I would suggest, do not just attempt mocks every now and then. Mocks will help you to understand. The sectional test will help you to understand where you are going wrong, right, for each and every subsection. But use mocks just to see whether you can keep focus for 2.5 hours, and whether you are able to tackle a particular section right after another section, right? So that's the thing we need to check about mocks. And other than, as long as you are able to identify the weak areas, I don't think there are 20 or 15 mocks are needed. We are, with 5 mocks, I guess a student can prepare well.
Yes. And I think I couldn't have agreed with you more, because, sometimes you just have to make sure that every mock you take, you just spend enough time to learn from your mistakes. So that, by the next mock, if you're taking in 2 days, you make sure you're not repeating those mistakes. And I think that's how the improvement happens. Right? Now, Rajesh, you were part of the last mile push program from the middle of your journey till the end, right? So, how important do you think having a support system like this in a GMAT journey? Like, what is the difference? Does it make a huge amount of difference?
Definitely yes, Afam. And when I started with eGMAT, to be very honest, I wasn't aware on the last mile program, because I was going through the content, right? And then the last mile programs comes in picture once I am done with the cementing stages and etc. Because that's where you guys will have a data or insights into what I'm doing wrong, or probably what a student is doing wrong, right? So, and that was another mistake I did for my GMAT Classic. So I remember that I finished my course, I attempted cementing quizzes, and then I booked my GMAT test, right? That was a mistake, because there was only 2-3 weeks for my Classic where you helped me. But we were not able to do much because the test date was booked, right? And that's where you told me, do not, and that's a mistake that I am not sure whether others do as well or not, but do not book the GMAT test, as long as you finish with the preparation. Finish with the preparation as in the course content, right? There's so many things. For example, test readiness, right, is so critical the 3 stages, right? One thing is you need to go through the course. The second stage is cementing, which I did for GMAT Classic.
Yes.
The test readiness, I did not spend good time. And then after my Classic, I remember we had a session where you told me that probably even if there is a one bad attempt under the Classic, right, you can probably you can brush up some of the things and you can go for a focus version, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I got a chance to go through the last mile program, because I have done with the cementing, I have done with the course content. And the one thing I should thank you is basically for your patience, right? There were some things that you used to tell me, like, for example, do this, do etc., etc. There was some action item which was laid down by you. I used to feel that I know better than you. And to be very candid with you, right? But then I realized that you guys have a particular data insights, and at the same time, what will work well, right, for a student, or probably for to get rid of that obstacle, right? So over the period of time, it could have been a shorter journey if I could have listened to you, but nevertheless, over the period of time, I realized that whatever you are telling, for example, whether it is a sequence of sections, right, what are the mistakes that I'm doing CR, right, what needs to be focused under RC, what needs to be focused under DI, right? So I would say last mile program is more than 50% of the preparation that for the eGMAT course, I would say. Why? Because it is the last stage where, because those 650 score is something you can reach by going through the course content and cementing, right? The additional 40 to 60 point improvements will come from your identification of weak areas and working on those, taking corrective actions. And that's where the last mile program will help a student to understand weak areas. At the same time, even if I know what are the weak areas, it's very difficult for me to understand and try out each and every corrective actions, right? So that's where, let's say, if someone is suggesting me to, this will probably help you to get rid of that weakness, is going to help a particular student, and that helped me as well. And I guess the mistake that I did for Classic, I did not do it for the focus one.
Yeah.
And I guess you suggested, in fact, you helped me to book a test. You suggested when should I book, whether I'm ready to book a test, what are the sequences, etc., etc. What should I do on the test day as well, right? All of those things came during the last mile program itself. So I would say it was. I would not say the course and the cementing wasn't helpful for me, but at the same time, the last mile program is very, very critical, and then that's where a student should keep focus and keep working on the weak areas.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, see, the course and the cementing is the major part, right? For someone to build that foundation and ability. The last mile push program is more, like you rightly put, it's more about, working on your weak areas, fine tuning where the small mistakes can happen and fixing those. And I think that I know it has been a journey for both of us, but it's ended well. So on a good note, right? Yes. Rajesh, talking about, your test day experience, right? Because we have to look into the fact that you actually, for GMAT Focus, you took 2 attempts, right? The attempt when did not go much as planned, but that was only because verbal dropped for you, right? And then you took the next attempt in a span of 2 to 3 weeks, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened in the first attempt? What was your score split, right? And what changes did you make, if you made any, and get to your 685 score?
Okay. So the first attempt, if I talk about the first attempt, right, as you rightly said, the verbal was the major problem in my first attempt.
Yeah.
It's not because I wasn't prepared, but it was because of the test day, right? So I did. So I started with Quant. I did. Very. I would not say fairly well, but I scored Q90. Right, that was my score for Focus attempt 1.
Yeah.
What went wrong for verbal is I got to know that I had done good in Quant. The mistake that I did is I took a break after Quant, and the moment, I would not say it could have helped for my verbal section though, but it's good to maintain momentum as well, right? So that break, I got to know that I have done very, very well in the Quant, and then when I started verbal, I wanted to finish the entire test, right, within the given time, and that's where I did terrible mistakes in initial few questions, right? Because when I went through the scores, right, I got to know that there are initial questions, and the RC was a major problem. Not only RC, but the CR was also a problem, right? And then right after verbal, I thought I knew that the verbal, I messed up the verbal section, but I kept going and I completed DI. DI and Quant was good for attempt 1. Then I realized for right after that, obviously I wanted to work on my sectional verbal section as well. There were some mistakes, as I said, right? The pausing for a pre-thinking or not doing a pre-thinking stage, right? That was a major problem for CR, I would say. And under RC, the timings was the issue, right? And comprehension was the issue. So I need to work a bit on my concepts. But when I attempted focus, the major change was the sequence. I took verbal at the end. But again, I mean, there was some technical glitch for my attempt, and technical glitch as in they did not allow us to go for a break for the focus attempt 2, which I had last week, right? So, but I guess that worked well for me, because if I was in that momentum, right, and I was preparing for the classic, so I had a habit of sitting there in the exam for 3.5 hours, right? Because that's where the duration of the classic version of GMAT, right? And 2.5 hours, in fact, not 2.5 hours, I'd say it's 2 hours and 15 minutes if I do not take that break, right? So in my opinion, probably not having that break helped me, because I attempted Quant, I attempted DI, and I got to know that Quant and DI are done. I got to know that, because those are the, more or less, I was doing good in those sections. I got to know that those sections were good. There were some mistakes, maybe there were some time constraints that happened for DI. But that momentum, I kept that going for verbal as well without a break. I guess that's where I'm not sure whether that helped me, not taking that break or not. But in my opinion, that momentum was there, and then that's how I scored 685. The only two changes I think is the sequence, which attempting verbal at the end, and probably not able to take that break worked for me. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have the break. Probably whatever works, we have to identify. But but irrespective of whether you're taking a break or not, make sure that what happens is, after the break, it's difficult to focus on first initial questions, right? And that's where I think when I used to do mistakes in verbal section, maybe because of the break or etc., right? So if you have, keep focus even if you're taking break, come back, and you have to be focused on first initial set of questions.
True. Makes sense. So Rajesh, now, it's been a journey. You've achieved the target that you really set out to be, right? So when you look back, are there any particular instances or learnings that you feel that you would like to share with the other GMAT aspirants?
The only thing, the major learnings when I went through this journey is, the exam, I would say the GMAT exam will test your patience. Not only with preparation, but during that exam day as well, right? Because it has been set up in such a way that it will test your test situations where you will handle pressure at the same time. Not only time pressure, but how will you skip the questions, right, as well for Quant? Like if you are spending too much time, if there are some obstacles, how you will irrespective of sticking to a particular difficult questions. So it tests your patience, etc., right? So the one thing is, which section you're going through, reading question carefully is the major part of your exam, I would say, because unless and until you get that question, you're not able to get to the answer, right? The second part is, you have to keep the focus, right? And the first part, right, which I talked about, read question carefully, will only come to you if you're focused during the entire 2.5 hours, right? And to be very honest with you, I not only did focused on my preparation, practicing on practicing weak areas, at the same time appearing for the mocks, but I did I was parallelly doing meditations and probably exercises, etc. Because what I realized is the verbal section, my scores varied for verbal so much that I realized that it's mainly because of the focus. If you're not reading a particular answer choice itself, you're bound to make mistakes, and that's where I think the focus is very, very critical for entire preparation, at the same time during the exam day, and read carefully is the second learning that I got to know. The one thing is I go when I'm done with so when I attempted my first GMAT focus, I wanted to stop the preparation, right? I thought that maybe it's okay after 2 attempts. The classic, after the classic one, right? I thought maybe that's a score, and maybe I will not score good in verbal. This is where I should stop, right? The 665 is what I remember I got in mock
GMAT
right?
Focus,
GMAT Focus, GMAT Focus 1. And then that's where I guess we had a session, and then you helped me to, you told me that probably basis the stats, you have the ability to score in verbal as well, right?
Uh-huh.
So to be very honest, I was reluctant. I wanted to stop the preparation, but then I realized if I spent almost 6 to 8, whatever, 4 to 6 months, right? It's worth giving another couple of months, or probably a month or so, where I can brush up, and then I'll give it like as if probably let's even if I do not do well, I have a 665 score, right?
Yes.
And that's where not taking too much of a pressure, I guess, helped me for the second attempt as well. So again, I guess those were the 2-3 things that helped me. And I to be very honest, I never thought probably I'll be doing sessions similar to this one, right? I never thought, because I have seen sessions, the success stories for eGMAT, right? I never thought I will do that, and thanks to you, because you not only build that confidence for me, but you help me like what are the whenever I'm doing a mistake, you help me to get rid of that mistakes, at the same time to keep build the patience as well for the test, for the preparation, etc. So thanks again.
I think you were a nice and a diligent student, right? Because I feel that, the best part about you, Rajesh, working with you, because we have been associated for a good couple of months now, 4 or 5 months into the journey. And, when we had that call after the GMAT focus attempt 1, we both had that thing that mocks were going so well, and this just seems off. Right, especially your verbal, because that was very much on the lower side at that point. And your quant, you had already hit a Q90. In DI also, you were already at a 82, 83 kind of level. So it was all in line. And this verbal in the middle just did not just add up, right? But I'm really happy that, you took it with a stride. And in the next 2-3 weeks, managing your work, shuffling things, you just went for it, right? And with the results are just in front of us, right? So I'm really, really glad that I could be part of this journey, right? So Rajesh, I think on that note, I would really like to thank you for taking out the time today, because it's been a pleasure first working with you, right? And also, I'm sure that the tips that you have shared are genuinely going to, help a lot of students out there when they look at your story. And I'm sure you're going to inspire lots and lots of them, right? Yeah. So all the best, Rajesh, and thank you for doing this.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Abha. Thank you. Bye.